Hi, welcome to week 17 of Discipleship Equip. My Uncle Don and his family had the farm about 1.5 miles south of the farm where our family lived, and he had this crazy neighbor named Olivana. And Olivana had cows, and these cows were always incredibly skinny, kind of like something out of Pharaoh's dream, the 7 skinny cows that ate the fat 7 plump cows. And she was just always doing these things that weren't terribly neighborly, like shooting at my uncle's dogs if she thought they might be coming after his cows, which they never did. But one Sunday evening, we were having a family get-together at my Uncle Don's house, and we were all sitting out on the patio in the front, and up drives Olivana. And she's in her rickety old pickup, and she jumps out, and if you've ever seen Ma Kettle, she looked like, I forget the lady's name, but the lady who played Ma Kettle in the old movies from the 50s. And she jumped out with her gray hair swinging all around, long gray hair, and coming in. She goes, I need help, my cow's stuck and I can't get it out. So we loaded up and went over to Olivana's pond, and there we found this decrepit old poor weak cow stuck in the mud at the edge of the farm pond. And so we put a rope around the cow, and we pulled and we pulled and we pulled, and that cow was so stuck we could not get it out. It wasn't until some of us went and got behind the cow, got under the cow, pushed on the backside, along with pulling from the front and pushing from the back, that we were able to finally get Olivana's cow out. And she was a very different neighbor from that point on, because we had come underneath her cow and helped her cow to get out of the mud and walk again back on dry land. I share that story because it illustrates a very important biblical principle, and that is the role of humility. Because essentially what humility means is to come under, to lower ourselves so that we can come underneath others. You know, there aren't very many attributes or qualities that Jesus ascribes or gives to himself. But in Matthew 11:28-30, he says this, Come to me, all who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So we see there that Jesus, who is God, ascribes to himself humility, which is interesting because if you go to any, at least the theology books that I've looked at that describe the attributes of God, you'll never see the attribute of humility. And yet Jesus never said, as far as I can recall, I am love, I am grace, but he said, I am humble. And I believe that really in so many ways, humility is the characteristic that underlies all the other godly characteristics, the fruit of the Spirit that God desires to see in us. Because we can't really love unless we're humble. We can't experience peace unless we're humble. We can't have joy, really, unless we're humble, coming underneath and saying, Lord, let me allow you to live your life through me. You might remember that in Matthew chapter 20, Mrs. Zebedee, the mother of James and John, came to Jesus and said, Hey, Jesus, I want you to put one of my sons at your right side and one of your left side when in the kingdom. Essentially, I want them to be the top-notch spiritual parents, because that's what we're talking about this week, is what is required to be a spiritual parent. And she says, I want them to kind of be the parents over all. And first of all, it made a huge ruckus amongst the other disciples. How dare you think that you can have that place, James and John? And yet Jesus said, you know what the rulers of the Gentiles do. They lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. And so I'm sharing this today because as we seek to be the spiritual parents that I believe God wants us to be, there are 2 temptations that we'll face. The first is that of spiritual pride. To think, hey, I'm on my way to becoming a spiritual parent, and these other folks, I look around, they aren't there yet. And, you know, it's okay to make assessments, but I pray that we'll do that with this attitude of humility, of coming to others and say, okay, Lord, here's someone that I've encountered who I pray that you'll bring growth that if there's some way I can help them to grow, that you'll help me to know how to do that. But to have that attitude and approach of humility, of coming under others, instead of lording over others, as the temptation is with spiritual pride if we fall prey to that sin. The second is this, is that as those who seek to be spiritual parents will say, boy, I just want someone to be my kid. I want someone to disciple. And we may need to wait patiently for that person or those persons that God may bring along to help us to form a triad or a small group, or whatever the situation might be. And yet be open to whoever that God may lay upon your heart, and just wait. As we move through Discipleship Equip and then on to the stages after Discipleship Equip, I will do everything I can and be open to your suggestions on how to help each one of you to step out and to become spiritual parents who are seeking to raise up disciples. But we'll have to work together in this and pray and seek the Lord's guidance in how do we implement this here in our local context. One thing that I have become convinced of as we've gone through Jim Putnam's book is that I do believe that it is God's plan for each and every follower of Jesus to move toward that goal of becoming a spiritual parent. Now I realize that the manifestation of that reality is going to look different for different people. And some may or may not actually disciple others the way that Putnam is talking about here. But I think many can, and hopefully many will, and that will continue to bring about a cultural shift in how we look at discipleship. It's not just simply knowing the Word, but it's also living the Word and sharing the Word and helping others to see that we have been given this incredible gift from God. And it is our responsibility now to share it with others so they might then share it with others. Be disciples who make disciples of Jesus Christ. So, I pray that we'll just keep in mind this role of humility as spiritual parents. It goes back to the life verse that I came upon many years ago, 2 Corinthians 3:5. Not that I'm adequate in myself as to consider anything as coming from myself, for my adequacy comes from God. That's a great verse for me to help me say, hey Steve, keep humble. Don't think of yourself more highly than you ought to think, and yet remember that God has made you adequate for all things, even to be a spiritual parent who then disciples others. So have a great week.